Writing advice out there just isn't that great, am I right? If it was, you'd probably be too busy writing rather than watching this video. Also, storytelling is somewhat subjective. The audience is not homogeneous, they want different things, which is a fact a lot of writing resources don't really address. That's when I realized I had to take matters into my own hands, and after several years of research and dedication, I finally present to you a system I'm calling the Narrative Compass. So you know how on the packaging of things like wine or coffee, you can sometimes get these diagrams that are supposed to indicate what the products taste like? Well, I figured out how to do something similar with films, categorizing all narrative information into 8 fundamental types of immersion, and then deriving a set of metrics from a film's unique distribution of information. Satisfaction metrics are concerned with subjective preferences for different information types, while competence metrics treat all information types equally but judge based on the composition of the information distribution. My system is a bit of a steep learning curve, but bear with me because besides helping you write, I believe this system will help you find films you really enjoy, learn about yourself in comparison to others as it pertains to taste in film, allow you to analyze narratives so you can make the most out of them, and just generally enrich your understanding of how fiction affects us. The system is akin to music theory, but for fiction, and I promise you, it will change the way you see storytelling. Also, did I mention that this system can predict a film's IMDb score? In case you needed any more convincing that I know what I'm talking about. All these metrics are entered into a specific formula, 2 different formulas depending on a film's age, and it will return the film's IMDb score to a fairly high degree of accuracy. But before I can get into how this is done, I'll need to properly explain what all the metrics actually measure within the film. I have already briefly described each information type and each metric in my first video on this channel. It's not a prerequisite, but definitely check it out later. Richness is a measurement of the average immersive density of a film. The basic premise is that the more dense a film's scenes are in immersive information, the richer the narrative. Any given scene in a film will contain anywhere between 0 to all 8 types of information, and whatever number that is will be the density level of that scene. Although negative information is also possible, we'll get to that topic another time. We assess all scenes in a film and assign a density level to each one, and then based on that data, calculate the average immersive density for the whole film, from which we can derive the richness score. But we'll get into the mathematical specifics another time. This is my second video in the series on the richness metric, but don't worry, these can be watched in any order. In the last one, I introduced the 3 information types related to creating intensity in the moment, and this is the continuation that will introduce the 3 information types associated with characterization. The one after this one will be on the 3 information types related to impulsivity, and the last video will be on the 3 information types related to external reality. Because these videos are designed to be watched in any order, this means I will be repeating myself in some areas. Returning viewers can just skip anything they are already familiar with. Let's continue our demonstration of how to determine the immersive density level of a scene. We will use the scene from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, where Puss first confronts the personification of death. It starts about 12 minutes into the film and lasts just under 4 minutes. And because it starts early in the film, it doesn't need much context, which is great for a demonstration. I will describe everything that happens in the scene and transcribe the dialogue. Then we will go through the list of criteria for each information type and determine which criteria does the scene meet, from which we can determine its level of immersive density. You can also look up the film clip that is the subject of our discussion here on YouTube and skip my reiteration. Before I begin to describe what happens in the scene, a little bit of context for people who might not be familiar with the film. In the first 12 minutes, we learn that Puss is a hero to some and a criminal to others. He's quite brazen and fearless since he has 9 lives. However, he realizes that he burned through his lives quicker than he initially thought and has already died 8 times before, which means his next death will be his final. The doctor implores him to retire from his life of adventure and suggests going to a cat retreat where he can be taken care of, which Puss promptly dismisses. So in this scene, Puss orders a glass of cream from a bar, and the bartender hands him the drink. "I am Puss in Boots, I am no one's lap cat," Puss proclaims in indignation. He takes a lick of the cream. "The doctor is a quack and a crazy man. He should have stick to cutting hair." "Last call, Senor Boots," the bartender calls out. "Another glass of cream. Make it your heaviest," Puss replies. "I keep the heavy stuff in the back," says the bartender and walks out of sight. Puss sits there for a moment. The candle blows out, he doesn't notice. "Retire. You're too good-looking to retire," he says to himself. He hears a tune being whistled. As he turns around, he sees a large hooded figure sitting next to him. "Well, well, if it isn't Puss in Boots himself," says the wolf, in the flesh. Puss in Boots acknowledges his presence. There's the famous hat, the feather, and of course the boots. "My compliments to your cobbler," the wolf continues. "Thanks. Good to meet you too," Puss says awkwardly and moves away from the wolf. "I never do this, but can I get your autograph? I've been following you for a long time," says Wolf as he shows Puss a wanted poster with his image on it. "Sign right there." He taps at the word dead. "Puss in Boots laughs at the face of Death Bounty Hunter," says Puss. The wolf removes his hood. "So I've heard." Puss stands on the table and readies his hand near his sword. "You will find your reward does not come easily. This I tell you." "Everyone thinks they'll be the one to defeat me," Wolf replies, leaning over the bar to get another drink. "But no one escaped me yet. All right, let's get it over with." Puss grabs his sword. "Fear me, if you dare." Before he can finish his sentence, his sword is driven out of his hand and into the barrel behind them. The wolf just takes a sip. Puss walks over to his sword, grabs it, and says, "Okay, no more messing around." He runs at the wolf and takes a few swings. The wolf dodges them all while still sipping. Slow, sloppy, sad. The wolf catches his sword between his sickles and pushes Puss off the table. Then Puss makes his attack by swinging off the chandelier, but Wolf just catches him by the throat and says, "You're not living up to your legend, Gato," and throws him across the room. Puss is unable to defend himself and Wolf gets a cut in. Puss sees the blood on his paw and is paralyzed by fear. The wolf smells the air. "I just love the smell of fear," he says in a drawn-out and intimidating way. He slowly approaches Puss with his sickle scraping across the floor. Puss sees his lives flash before his eyes. "What's the matter? Lives flashing before your eyes?" Wolf asks. He kicks the sword towards Puss. "Pick it up." He says it again. Puss runs for his life, hides in the bathroom, and closes the door behind him. Wolf whistles as he approaches. His shadow looms over Puss. He searches for a place to escape. When Wolf enters, Puss is nowhere to be seen. He has escaped through the sewer. This concludes the scene. Now let's go through the criteria for the 3 information types on the right side that are categorized as personal or character-focused. First is the influence information type. Influence is categorized as personal and explicit. It is the information type responsible for representing the personal, emotional dimension of a character's agency. Influence is the second type of way the agency role of fiction can be fulfilled. There are 4 narrative roles that encompass the 4 reasons to engage with a fictional narrative, which are vicariously experienced agency, intricate connectivity, edge-of-your-seat anticipation, and the revelation of meaning. I've already talked a little bit about narrative roles in my first video on this channel, but we will look at them in even more depth when I cover the satisfaction metrics, where achievement information is related to the consequential side of agency, influence information is related to the responsive side. It can be thought of as characterization relating to the future, such as future-oriented ambitions, anxieties, vulnerabilities, and expression of concern, will, principle, or desire. A character can't always affect their circumstances, however, they can exercise their agency in the way they respond, what they believe, and how they influence others. The immersive purpose of influence information is to evoke the audience's vicarious experience of a character's feelings through conflicts and hardships related to something of personal significance to that character. The appeal of influence-dominant narratives is to progress a character's principled or emotional response to their situation, or conversely, progress their situation by means of principled or emotional influence. The criteria for fulfilling the requirements of influence information are as follows. Criteria 1. A character actively tries to achieve a desired goal of personal or principled significance. Criteria 2. A character actively tries to prevent something they fear of personal or principled significance. Criteria 3. A character urges another character to think, do something, or act in a particular way, in either an inspiring, manipulative, or disparaging way. Criteria 4. A character justifies their actions or lack of actions due to their principles. Criteria 5. A character experiences a significant emotion of personal or principled significance associated with failure or success. Does our scene contain influence information? Yes, it does. It fulfills criteria 1 and 3 from Wolf's perspective. He has been waiting a long time for this confrontation, making it of personal significance. If you look closely, you will see that Wolf has the countdown of Puss's 9 lives etched on his sickle. He doesn't just want to take his last life, he also wants to intimidate and humiliate Puss, take him down a notch. He urges Puss to keep fighting, knowing Puss is outmatched, to drive that point. The scene fulfills criteria 2 and 5 from Puss's perspective. This is the first time he experienced fear of such magnitude. His failure causes his life to flash before his eyes. The images he sees are of a personal nature rather than of his achievements. To make things clear, a scene only needs to qualify for one criteria to fulfill the requirement of an information type. There are no extra points for fulfilling more than one criteria or anything like that. The criteria are just there to provide specific examples of how the immersive purpose of an information type can be achieved, but we are ultimately judging a scene on whether it fulfills that purpose or not. This means that in the future I might add additional criteria to the lists if I come across examples and stories that I judge to fulfill an immersive purpose, but don't have a criteria that describes it well. If we include information types from our previous installments, our scene now qualifies for at least 3 levels of immersive density. It now contains the complete range of explicit information types: achievement, rhythm, and influence. Explicit information types create intensity in the moment. Achievement provides the external consequences, rhythm draws out the anticipation through several increments, and influence gives a personal, emotional impact to the scene. The scene now also fulfills 2 out of the 2 ways of fulfilling the agency role, using both achievement and influence information types, and 1 out of 2 ways of fulfilling the anticipation role, using rhythm information. Let's move on to the next information type. Next is the relationship information type. Relationship is categorized as personal and neutral. It is the information type defined by relationship dynamics and character personality. Its immersive purpose is to ground the story by establishing characters as believable individuals. Relationship information can be thought as characterization relating to the present. It informs how a character interacts with or thinks about other characters or external reality under present circumstances, which can change over time. Aspects related to influence information, such as emotion, vulnerability, and ambition, in and of themselves are mostly universal, therefore not so conducive to individuality. Everybody wants to live their dream, no one wants to suffer. Without the proper character grounding, influence information alone might come across as emotionally leading to some, offering vicariousness without the proper substance of character. This could make the characterization of a story feel somewhat surface level or overly sappy. While aspects related to reflection information, such as a character's perception and ideas about themselves, are just that, ideas or concept not actually tangible or grounded. Without properly developed individuality or relationships, a focus on reflection information might make a character's beliefs or flaws overshadow the individual to the extent that these may come across as didactic, as if the character was created solely to teach a lesson or propagate values. Without believable individuality, personal agency contained by influence is too universal to be distinct, and personal meaning contained by reflection is too subjective to be immediately relatable or empathetic. Relationship brings everything into context. In order to complete the illusion that you're observing a lifelike individual and have the personal agency and meaning feel organic and impactful, you need to see characters as separate from yourself, separate from the author, as well as separate from one another, and the best way this can be achieved is through relationships and opinions. By relating and connecting characters to other characters and progressing these relationships from one state to another, the narrative can achieve a sense of self-containment, where these characters can feel real and interconnected, regardless of the plot, setting, message, themes, captured feelings, or the vicarious experience of the story. In doing so, fulfills one of the two ways the connectivity role/necessity of fiction can be fulfilled. Connectivity essentially defines the static or observational elements of your story that can be uniquely identified. There is an external and personal component to connectivity, the external component being the systems and setting of a story, and the personal component being the interconnectivity of personalities or recognizable archetypes. The immersive purpose of relationship information can be fulfilled without focusing on relationships between people. It can also be fulfilled through commentary from a character on the state of their situation and the response to it as a distinct and memorable individual. Here we're still developing a sense of personality in relation to other things. On the other hand, with perhaps the exception of comedies, a narrative where relationship information is well developed, but the other personal information types are not, can also cause some issues. Character dynamics would be primarily based on differences of opinion in such a scenario, as opposed to differences of principles, desires, values, and perspectives, which are far more authentically personal and conducive to influence and empathy between people. These narratives will likely be more static character-wise and lack a sense of personal progression, because even when distinct individuals are present, we won't get sufficient insight into their inner workings. They might not have strong desires, vulnerabilities, or insecurities, which gives them reason to take on challenges, and they won't have a deeper perspective on reality and life that they get out of their beliefs and how the events that they've experienced form their values and development, which allows other characters to reevaluate their own. Relationship information in a vacuum represents how people want to present themselves to others, and that can be its own focus, especially if the narrative is trying to capture a specific social scene or create a more plot-focused narrative such as a murder mystery. To put it succinctly, different opinions are excellent at creating boundaries between characters, which makes them appear more real and individualistic, but nothing but opinions like the more holistic understanding of the human experience. However, the threshold at which any imbalances between the information types pose an issue to people is subject to individual preferences. Ensemble casts have their own distinct appeal in comparison to more personally intimate or introspective stories. Alternatively, the connectivity role that is responsible for grounding a story through connective and distinctive detail can also be either partially or majorly fulfilled by using system information related to system and settings. Although relationship remains the more palatable and more accessible method of providing grounding. There could be some level of cultural differences in relation to how different groups value the concept of individualism, as well as differences in individual tastes and interests that can change that status. Now, until more recently, I had the belief that since human beings are social creatures, All the methods of fulfilling the narrative roles that are closer to being personal are for that reason more palatable. Since then, I have discovered a better explanation makes some information types more palatable than others, which we will discuss another time. Overall, the appeal of relationship-dominant narratives comes from observing characters who feel like real individuals, observing the challenges and progress in the relationship dynamic of these individuals, and the fun and comedy that stems from their contrasting personalities. The criteria to fulfill the requirements for relationship information are as follows. Criteria 1. A character inquires, makes a judgment, or expresses an opinion about another character. Criteria 2. A character makes an action, judgment, or expresses an opinion about the world or event, revealing the worldview, personality, or skills. Characterization that's neither past, experience-based, nor future-oriented, ambition or principle-based. Criteria 3. A scene establishes a character dynamic or relationship. Criteria 4. A new interaction between characters contrasts the previously established dynamic. Criteria 5. A new interaction between characters changes the dynamic previously established. Criteria 6. The scene reveals a character's unique or memorable quirk. Criteria 7. The presence of naturalistic dialogue with focus on the way it's spoken, less on what is spoken, or organic/opportunistic humor. Does a scene contain relationship information? Yes, it does. It fulfills criteria 1 and criteria 3, and arguably criteria 2 and criteria 6. The scene reveals that Wolf's opinion of Puss is that he is an arrogant, self-assured coward who does not live up to his legend. The scene establishes a character dynamic between Puss and Wolf through an unresolved conflict created by a belittling judgment. It will be either Wolf or Puss who will have the final say about the nature of Puss's true character and whether Wolf's initial judgment remains correct. Any scene that introduces an interaction with a new significant character generally qualifies for relationship information by default. The design, choice of weapon, and mannerisms such as the iconic whistle also contribute to the memorable characterization of the wolf. Our scene now qualifies for 4 levels of immersive density. Let's now look at the reflection information type, which will be the last one for this video. Reflection is categorized as personal and implicit. It is the information type defined by characterization relating to the past or a character's perception of themselves and how they relate to the world that is often created by past experiences. Reflection-dominant narratives often involve character arcs or transformations, especially ones that rely on some kind of change in a character's values or development, such as a redemption arc, a lesson learned, a distinction between right and wrong, better or worse. It can be about the lies a character has been telling themselves, or it involves resolving something that was holding them back, such as trauma or insecurity. That aspect of personal development, that sense of making things right, is the primary appeal of reflection-dominant narratives. Negative character arcs and transformations, such as the failure to overcome flaws, learn a lesson, or outright devolve into tragedy, can also be included in the reflection sentiment. Each of the personal immersive information types have something unique to offer when it comes to relatability. The influence information type makes the audience relate to characters on an explicit, vicarious level through the universality of our impulses, suffering, vulnerability, ambition, or desire. Relationship information makes the audience relate to characters through a neutral, observational sense of individuality, distinction of personality, chemistry, and charisma. And reflection information makes the audience relate to characters through a more implicit, introspective, evaluatory, empathetic, and conceptual engagement. Both influence and reflection types of information are empathy-evoking, but influence is immediate and less abstract, eliciting empathy to emotional responses, while reflection is more representational, eliciting empathy to past events, personal beliefs, or conceptualizations. Reflection information often allows the audience to put themselves in a character's shoes, and through implicit comparison possibly even help contextualize and understand something about themselves. The nature of memory and past experience will inevitably mean that a character's perception and identity will be based on some kind of concept or framework of understanding. A character doesn't always have to reflect or talk about their own experiences to fulfill the reflection information type, but contextual attention still needs to be given to a character's past events or conceptual perceptions. The immersive purpose of reflection is to inform and contextualize characters in accordance to a character-related concept or framework. In reflection-dominant narratives, this concept or framework is then explored or progressed in some way throughout the narrative, becoming the thematic crux of the story, while in a more supporting use case for the reflection sentiment, simply provides the context for different people's value judgments and perceptions, adding a layer of perspective to your story. Either methods provide one of the ways the meaning role of fiction can be fulfilled. I generally associate the term character arc in its vernacular sense with reflection information, but it's a bit of a vague term. Audiences don't always need to engage with reflection and its conceptualizations to infer a character arc from a story. An influence-based character progression or a significant development of a relationship are also valid character arcs, at least in my opinion. Even an achievement-based progression is meaningful enough for some people. However, these progressions will be less deep or meaningful in a more thematic, conceptual, or communicative sense, and therefore will not be quite as satisfying or cathartic, or just generally as complete, unless they incorporate at least one of the two meaning information types, reflection or uncertainty, which provide a more powerful sense of eternal conflict and resolution. The difference is these two provide a psychological direction and a kind of wisdom to the meaning of the story, while the other progressions are more or less only focused on a goal. After all, this is the reason why character need versus want advice exists. But remember, people are different, therefore a character's personal development doesn't always involve conceptual introspection. So it's a case of squares and rectangles. All conceptual introspection is about personal development or failure, but not all personal development is about conceptual introspection. Personal development can also be achieved through uncertainty, but as I will demonstrate in the next video, it's certainly the more chaotic option where the subconscious does all the work. Here are the criteria needed to fulfill reflection information requirements. Criteria 1. A scene establishes a character's normal range of experience, responsibilities, or recurring events or routines, a status quo. Criteria 2. A character experiences an event that has or will have a dramatic impact on the course of their lives, their motivations, beliefs, or mode of being, in a context of a dedicated character arc or progression. Criteria 3. A character reflects on or reveals their own or others' past actions or experiences that impacted a character's motivations, beliefs, or mode of being. Criteria 4. A character justifies their actions or lack of actions due to experience. Criteria 5. A character deals with ramification of past trauma, tragedy, or mistake. Criteria 6. A character shows a desire to redeem or rectify past mistakes or regrets. Criteria 7. A character acts in a way or does something that expresses moving on from the past, or the failure to do so. Criteria 8. The death of a character who experienced at least one of the previous reflection criteria. And criteria 9. A scene shows how an event impacts the beliefs or mode of being of a character or a larger group without a dedicated character arc or progression. Does our scene contain reflection information? Yes. The scene qualifies for criteria 2. Puss experiences an event that has a dramatic impact on the course of his life, which changes his mode of being. Puss becomes quite risk-averse and fearful after this confrontation, in contrast to his behavior at the start. With implicit information types, you need to consider a scene in the context of a larger narrative. The first 12 minutes of this film provided the context of Puss's self-perception, the idea that he's fearless. And the scene is specifically intended to create a change in that perception. In fact, the scene that follows depicts Puss holding a funeral for his legendary persona. It is the pivotal moment that sets Puss' transformational arc into motion, because the concept on which he based his identity has been shattered. So I would say it definitely qualifies. Because of this failure of agency and shattered perception of himself, Puss is pretty much forced into a situation where his values and concept of heroism and bravery need to be reconsidered, but he resists the pressures to transform almost every step of the way until the climax. Our scene now qualifies for 5 levels of immersive density. It now contains both the complete range of explicit information types as well as personal, character-focused information types, including all 3 ways to create vicarious intensity and all 3 ways the audience can relate to character. So far, the scene contains 2 out of 2 ways to fulfill the agency role using both achievement and influence information. It contains 1 out of 2 ways to fulfill the anticipation role using rhythm information. It contains 1 out of 2 ways to fulfill the connectivity role using relationship information. And finally, it contains 1 out of 2 ways to fulfill the meaning role using reflection information. The scene has now fulfilled every narrative role in some way. I have observed that such scenes have a unique quality to them. You certainly want the climax of your story to be complete in this way, to fulfill and pay off all the audience's initial reasons for engaging with your story. Role-complete or necessity-complete scenes, as I have come to call them, near the beginning, just like this one, provide an excellent way to convey the story's premise by a competent and organized demonstration of multifaceted immersive sentiment. This will hook the audience in a very authentic manner. We also need at least a couple of additional necessity-complete scenes throughout the duration of the story, at about equal intervals. These might not always be the most memorable, but this quality of completion generally corresponds to scenes in which new circumstances have been created and the story achieves a sense of tangible progress. These scenes act as stations on a long journey, marking both where you've been and where you're headed to in the story. Necessity completeness is essential to a sense of good pacing. Scenes that only fulfill 3 roles will also work, just not to the same effectiveness as the scenes that include all 4. This rule is generally true, but because of differences in palatability, certain ways of fulfilling the narrative role's necessities might not be quite as effective for everyone. Palatability of immersive information is something I talk about in more detail in my previous video on this topic. I will add even more to the understanding of palatability as we go along. Here's the graph of the position of all the necessity-complete scenes in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. These dots indicates where a necessity-complete scene ends, and the thicker line indicates the duration of the scenes. The first necessity-complete scene in this film is Puss's first confrontation with death, the scene we're currently in the process of analyzing. The second one is a brief scene where death appears to Puss in a crowd. The third one is where death appears to Puss the 3rd time and Puss has a panic attack. The fourth one, the Santa Coloma scene, which directly follows the third one, is where Puss, after calming down, reflects on and expresses his life regrets to his new friend Perito, who helped him to calm down. Unbeknownst to him, his past lover Kitty Softpaws was also listening. The fifth one is where Puss gets the chance to speak directly to his past lives, and where death appears to Puss the 4th time, explicitly revealing himself to Puss as death, being a lot more brutal in his judgment this time around. In his escape, Puss unwittingly leaves his friends feeling isolated once again. And the 6th and final necessity-complete scene in this film is the climax where Puss confronts death for the last time, and in a presentation that mirrors the first confrontation, Puss fights death and wins the duel, proves his judgments wrong, and finally makes things right by his friends. We will take a closer look at the other necessity-complete scenes and the types of immersive information they use in a later video, after I have completed the explanation for each information type. This is as far as we will go in this video, but in the next video we will look at the 3 information types related to impulsivity, subtext, and theme, which are largely responsible for the process of interpretation. These are reflection, uncertainty, and system. During the videos focused on the richness metric, we are only concerned whether or not a scene contains any given information type. But next we will cover the impact metric, which is concerned with the order the information types are prioritized in each scene. Certain configurations are more conducive to the creation of conflict and stakes than other configurations, which is something we will get into in due course. I hope you found this insightful, but feel free to ask me any questions in the meantime. Also, don't forget to check out my Substack, which is where the bulk of the material on the Narrative Compass will be found. It is at narrativecompass.substack.com. Link in the description. Check out this neat way to visualize all of a film's narrative information, which can give you an idea of its substance and presentation, structure and pacing, and its most impactful combination of immersive elements at a glance. Check out my Substack if you would like to learn how to read such an infographic. At first, I will be selecting films that will be good at demonstrating how certain measurements function within the system. But after that, I will be willing to take suggestions on what films, franchises, or collections do you want to see compared to each other in this way. Let me know your thoughts and suggestions.